Dinotopia, Windchaser by Scott Cienson. Chapter 1. September 20th, 1863. Raymond Wilkes sat on his bed, nervously handling his father's pocket watch. He didn't have to look at its face to know the time. It was exactly 1 minute later than the last time he checked. The 13-year-old waited alone in the cold, tiny cabin on the prison ship Redemption. His father was the ship's surgeon. More than an hour ago, he was called above deck. A storm raged, and lightning flashed through the porthole behind Raven. Fists of hail beat against the glass in a furious rhythm. Shadows danced, and the thunder rocked the walls. The cabin rose and fell, following the motions of the ship on the crashing waves. The ship had sailed from London. It was bound for the penal colonies of Western Australia with a load of dangerous criminals. Days ago, the terrible storm had begun and blown the ship wildly off course. Today, the prisoners had taken advantage of the chaos and risen up against the crew. All through the Redemption, a battle was raging. The prisoners were attempting to take control of the ship. Suddenly, a shot rang out from the hall. Raymond shuddered as he heard a thump that sounded like a fallen body. The howls of angry men drifted close. Another flash of lightning lit his cabin. Raymond saw the reflection in the glass of his extinguished reading lamp. A shock of brown hair fell across his forehead, and a haunted look crept into his wide blue eyes. People often told Raymond how much he looked like his father. He had the same serious brow with the same strong, confident features in the making, but now Raymond could no longer see the resemblance. All he saw was his own terror. Fighting back tears, Raymond felt ashamed of himself. He was acting like a child. Before Stephen Wilkes left, he gave his son strict instructions to remain in their cabin with the door bolted shut until the trouble passed. Yet Raymond desperately wanted to run and find someone to tell him everything would be all right. He wanted his father to return to the cabin and calm him with his gentle smile. A great wave caught the ship. Raymond cried out as the cabin lurched forward. The boy was tossed out of bed onto the hard wood floor. He felt like a fledgling being hurled from the nest. Gathering his courage, Raymond rose to his knees and listened for a moment. The sounds in the corridor stopped. The ship righted itself, sending Raymond sliding back into a wooden chest. He grabbed hold of it for support and hauled himself to his feet. The pocket watch slipped from his hands. He picked it up and dropped it into his boot, the trick of his father's. Raymond had seen him do this whenever they traveled through dark or dangerous territory. Raymond had once asked him, "Father, why not hide your money clip in your boot instead, if it's the thieves you're worried about?" "Money can be replaced," Stephen Wilkes told his son. "Let them have the money, and perhaps they will search no further. This watch is special because of the memories attached to it. My father gave it to me the day I became a physician, and one day I will give it to you, if I become a healer." His father had laughed. "No matter what path you choose, I shall always be proud of you." A little more than an hour ago, his father pressed the pocket watch into Raymond's hand. A sad look came into the older man's eyes when Raymond asked why he was given the keepsake now. "Just hold it for me," his father said with a gentle smile. "I'll be back for it, you'll see." But he did not come back. Now, more than an hour later, Raymond was going to find him. After taking a deep breath, he unbolted the lock, eased the door open, and peered into the corridor. Raymond could see nothing. The hall was shrouded in darkness. Lanterns that usually hung along the wall had either been taken or smashed. Raymond's knees became watery. A tightness formed in his stomach. He forced himself to think only of his father. Then he left the cabin. He used the wall to guide him, and he soon reached a ladder that would take him back above deck. He climbed to the top rung and stopped. The trap door above him was closed. It took all of his strength to force it open. Icy wind and rain struck his face. He nearly lost his grip on the ladder. His flailing hand fell upon a coiled rope near the opening to the main deck. With determination born of fear, Raymond grabbed hold and pulled himself up. The storm was worse than he imagined. He could see little more than a few feet before him. When he tried to stand, Raymond slipped on the slick, hard wood of the deck. The breath was drummed out of him. Above the rising wail of the wind, he heard pistol shots and a crash of swords. Suddenly, a figure appeared before him. "It's the Wilkes lad!" someone shouted. "Come and join the party, has he?" another asked. The second man's malevolent tone robbed Raymond of any hope that these men were crew members. Raymond tried to scramble out of the path of the approaching figures, but his efforts were wasted. Someone else grabbed him from behind. He was hauled to his feet, his arms pinned behind his back. A man carrying a lantern came forward. Pockmarks covered his face, and his eyebrows were a single line across his forehead. Long, scraggly hair and an ill-kept beard framed his hard features. "Greetings, son of Stephen Wilkes, former ship's surgeon," the bearded man shouted over the storm. "I wonder if you will give us as much trouble as your dear papa." Did this mean his father was dead? Raymond could not believe it. "Where's my father?" Raymond cried. The bearded man grinned, revealing a mouth filled with rotted teeth. "Gone, lad. We threw his body overboard, same as we're going to do to you." With that, Raymond was hauled towards the side of the ship. Thunder roared and lightning ripped across the sky. A single bolt broke into 3 jagged branches. For an instant, the ship was lit up, as if the sun had miraculously appeared. In that brief moment, Raymond saw the black and churning sea. He thought of his father's body sinking deeper, deeper into its bottomless depth. "This can't be happening," Raymond thought. His father could not be dead. Raymond longed for a chance to touch him one more time, but even that had been denied him. "Father!" Raymond cried into the wind. A bearded man grabbed Raymond's arm and hauled him to the rail. "Since you seem so intent on being close to your dear papa, I think I'll send you right to where he's gone." Suddenly, before Raymond could be tossed into the sea, another figure leaped out of the storm. A heavy wooden object was brought down on the bearded man. He sank to the deck, his lanterns crashing and going out. In the sudden darkness, Raymond felt a sharp wind rip past his left ear. The man who had been holding him from behind cried out and loosened his grip. As lightning flashed across the sky again, Raymond saw a tall, thin young man standing over the body of the bearded convict. Raymond was startled to see that his savior was also a prisoner, and only a few years older than Raymond. "Those bloody fools can't see what's coming," the black-haired stranger said as he grasped Raymond's arm and pulled him towards the rail. "But we can't," Raymond protested weakly. He could not believe it. Had this boy saved him only to send him to the same watery grave? But then, in the distance, Raymond saw a high gray wall racing towards their way. The young prisoner was lean but strong. He gripped Raymond around the waist and launched them both over the side. An instant later, they struck the hard, churning waters and vanished beneath them. Chapter 2. The water was cold. Raymond broke the surface alone, gasping for breath. The older boy was floating beside him. For a minute, Raymond feared he would look back at the ship and see prisoners pointing their pistols at him. But when he turned, he saw something even more terrifying. A huge, gray wave towered over the ship. It seemed to hesitate. On the ship's deck, most of the men looked stunned. A few ran towards the rail. "Swim, blast ya!" yelled the black-haired boy. Raymond tried to force his paralyzed limbs into motion, but his mind was shutting down in the face of certain death. There was no point in trying to swim from here. The wave would be upon them before they were 100 yards from the ship. With a cry of frustration, the older boy grabbed the back of Raymond's shirt collar and began to swim away. Flipping over, Raymond started to kick. He swam with a fury matched only by the young prisoner who had dragged him from the ship. "That's it! That's right! Come on!" the older boy cried. "Put your back into it if you want to live!" Raymond did as he commanded. "I don't want to die," he thought. "I want to live. I want to make all my father's sacrifices mean something. I want to live." Suddenly, several shapes appeared in the water before the swimmers. They were dark and sleek, with fins that cut smoothly through the rough waves. Raymond's heart nearly stopped. Was he now going to become the main dish for 2 hungry sharks? Then one of the shapes raised its head. Raymond gasped with relief as he looked into the noble face of a dolphin. One of the dolphins glided beneath Raymond and rose up towards him, its fin suddenly appearing between his hands. Extraordinary! Impossible! The dolphin seemed set on saving Raymond. Looking over, Raymond saw the other boy grab hold of the second dolphin's fin. Raymond quickly did the same. The dolphin's flesh was warm, despite the cool temperature of the ocean waters. Behind him, Raymond heard the great wave crash down upon the ship. The sounds rose above the endless drumming rain and churning waves. Raymond knew it would only be a matter of seconds before he felt the wave's impact and was buried beneath the waters. But suddenly, he was racing forward at great speed. He felt the crush of water falling on him, but by now he was clear of all but the tail end of the wave. For a moment, he and the dolphin were sent many feet below. In no time they were raising upward again, back to the surface. The currents created by the huge waves continued to propel them forward. Raymond held on, though what little energy he had now was all but wasted. One hand gripping the fin, the other wrapped around the dolphin's body, Raymond closed his eyes and hoped he would live to see daylight. Some time later, hours, minutes, there was no way to tell, Raymond caught sight of a number of breakers. The other boy whooped and yelled, letting go of his dolphin and swimming towards the rocks. The storm was lessening. In the rare flashes of lightning, Raymond saw the white sand of a shoreline. "Thank you," he whispered, then let go of the dolphin, who carried him to safety. Moments later, Raymond was climbing onto the rocks and grasping the arms of his rescuer. Together, they found their way to the shore. They both collapsed in exhaustion as deep, dreamless sleep overcame them. Raymond felt warmth seeping into him. It was wonderful. His eyes flickered open, and the glare of sunlight blinded him. He rolled to his side and stretched. The fine sand beneath him felt soft under his waking body. He yawned, and for a moment even felt happy to be alive. Then thoughts came flooding back. He remembered the ship and his murdered father. Raymond sat up. He wiped the sleep from his eyes and looked around. Clear blue ocean waves gave way to a long white sand beach. Beyond lay dense green forest. On the beach, several yards away, was a black-haired boy, wearing what was left of a prisoner's uniform. He was leaning on his elbow, staring out into sea. Raymond followed his gaze and was immediately taken by an odd vision. Several dolphins raced back and forth, diving and bursting from the water. To Raymond, they seemed to be performing a kind of aquatic ballet. The sight was both dazzling and strange. "Don't bloomin' believe it," the older boy said with a thick, lower-class London accent, "but I think they've been waiting to see if you was all right. This hubbub they started when you come around." "Uh-huh," Raymond said, disoriented. The older boy made his hand into a fist and showed it to the back of Raymond. "Quick, how many fingers am I holding up?" "That's not funny," Raymond said as he rose to his feet and stretched. "Says who?" The older boy looked back to the dolphins playing in the water. He was thin and pale from his time in the dark cells in the Redemption's hold. Nevertheless, he appeared quite strong, with curly black hair, bright green eyes, and sharp features. Though his clothes were torn, the boy gave off the pride and confidence of a prince. Turning, Raymond looked towards the forest behind them. The flora was odd, exotic even. Though he was well-traveled, he had never seen anything quite like it. Something that looked like a pine cone the size of the man was plainly visible. Ferns grew from its crest. The trees were like palms, only stranger somehow? Taller, fiercer. He was certain he spied magnolias and ginkgos. "The name's Hugh Donovan, in case you're wondering." The boy's words yanked Raymond away from his observations. Raymond looked over to his companion. "My name is—" "Raymond Welks. Yeah, I know. Your father was a good man. I'm sorry." The 13-year-old turned his gaze downward. Tears began to choke him. Raymond tried to hold them back. He did not want to cry in front of his new friend. Then panic struck him. He yanked off his boot and turned it upside down. The pocket watch tumbled out. Raymond clawed it from the cool sand and held it close. The watch had stopped, just like his father's heart. He put it away and stared at the cracked surface. "What's that?" Hugh asked. "My father gave it to me," Raymond said. The older boy nodded and said nothing more. "You saved my life," Raymond said. "Yeah, so?" I wanted to say thank you." Hugh shrugged. An awkward silence followed. The dolphins finished their celebration and swam off. Hugh raised a hand in slight wave. Finally, Raymond asked, "Do you think anyone else survived?" "I doubt anyone else had the brains to jump off the ship in time." Hugh paused and thought, then added, "A lot of good men died last night." "Yes, the captain was very kind, and I was talking about the bloke I was chained up with." Raymond slipped the watch back into his boot. "Really?" "Uh-huh. Harry was his name. You know what wicked crime he was paying for?" Raymond shook his head. "Stealing bread to feed his children. Odd part is, if he had been fat and slow, they would have let him off. But Harry was young and strong, a real good worker, so he's put on the ship, like me." "But that's not fair," said Raymond. "Why should a man's sentence be decided whether or not he's a good worker?" "Because the English crown has a bloomin' new pact with the Aussies, that's why." "Pardon?" "The Australians." They need cheap workers, see? Did your friend tell you all this? Raymond asked. Did the man you were chained up with? Hugh nodded. The Aussie started all these townships out in the bloody boonies, all the way on the other side of the continent from their big cities in the east. So they need cheap workers to man their work camps and help build west colonies up, you see? I see, said Raymond. No, you don't. There's a huge wilderness beyond the work camps. I was told that most of the guards don't even bother posting sentries. If the prisoners go out into the wild, so be it. Either they come back or they starve. Ah, Raymond said. I'm saying all this because I feared we may have landed where we was bound. Raymond nodded, despair washing over him. Australia. Question is, what part? We're near the cities, where I might have a chance. Or right in the middle of the bloody, unfriendly wilderness. Both of them looked to the forest. Hugh shrugged. I don't see much of anything that looks like a city. You could be wrong, Raymond said weakly. He felt despair and fear closing in on him. This may not be Australia. True, but if we're on some uncharted island, I don't guess our chances are much greater. Raymond was unable to contain his tears any longer. He sat down heavily and buried his face in his hands. Hey now, Hugh said, none of that. Sorry, Raymond said between racking sobs. But what are we going to do? We don't know where we are. There's no one here. How are we going to survive? I've always had my father around, and now he's gone. Hugh sighed. Come on now, it's not that bad. But you just said. It goes to show you, I don't always think before I open my trap. All right then. Raymond's face was flushed. Tears streaked from his reddened eyes. Hugh got up, tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve, and passed it to Raymond. Here, dry yourself off, why don't you? The younger boy almost laughed, despite his tears, and took the cloth and blew his nose. Now I bloody well don't want it back, Hugh said. Raymond laughed again. Hugh knelt down and helped the boy to his feet. Raymond was a little wobbly. You need some food in you, that's what you need, Hugh said. Where are we going to find any? Raymond asked. Hugh pointed to the woods. Looks like some kind of trail to me. With any luck, it's man-made. And not Western Australia man-made either. With any luck, Raymond said, his gaze returning to the water. Unless you're an expert fisherman or something? Raymond spun. Not likely. I can't even swim very well. Lucky those dolphins save us. Bleeding amazing, wasn't it? It was, Raymond said as he walked towards the gap between the two great trees. I've read somewhere that dolphins are very intelligent, but this defies all reason. I know, Hugh said, laughing. It's like the bleeding circus, only with fins. Minutes later, they disappeared into the trees. Chapter 3. The two boys walked into the deep forest, marveling at all they saw. Odd-looking birds with brilliantly colored plumage flew past them, while a group of salamanders crossed their trail. Occasionally, an animal screeched, or a cry made them jump. When Hugh saw an oversized fruit dangling from a tree, he stopped. Before Raymond knew what was happening, his friend leaped into the air and plucked it from its branch. That might be poisonous, Raymond cried as Hugh took a bite. Right, Hugh said, chomping away until he finished his mouthful. Tell that to my stomach. I don't know about you, but I haven't seen much of anything that looks familiar. Raymond nodded slowly. So the only way to see if something will hurt us is to try it, eh? I suppose. Hugh plucked another fruit. It was dark and red and shiny. If it had been a bit smaller, it might have passed for an apple. Hugh tossed the fruit to Raymond. We'll wait a while to see if I keel over. If not, we'll figure it safe. Raymond sighed. Okay. We're going to have to toughen you up a bit now, aren't we? Hugh said cheerily. See, I ain't never had anyone to take care of me. I had to learn the ins and outs of surviving all myself. Don't worry, I'll teach you. We've come this far together, I'm not about to give up on you now. Raymond smiled. His stomach was growling, but his mind made him wait a good 10 minutes before he bit into the food. The tangy taste was strange to him, yet quite good. They quickly came upon a hard-packed dirt road that was certainly man-made. It was twice as wide as any road Raymond had ever seen. The boys decided to stick to this road. Once in a while, they paused to inspect some strange tracks. Some were made by wheels, other by creatures that left shallow, dusty footprints rather larger than an elephant's. Raymond? Hugh asked. Yes? You're an educated lad. I suppose, Raymond said. How big would a creature have to be to leave tracks like that? Hugh wondered. You don't want to know, Hugh grimaced. You're right, I don't. Raymond bent low. This is quite amazing, Hugh shrugged. Probably just a prank or something played by the locals. Raymond nodded in agreement, but his brow creased in thought. Bloomin' odd place, this, Hugh said. Truly, truly, truly odd. They resumed their travels and tried to ignore the appearance of more and more of the huge tracks. They finally stopped when they reached a fork in the road. Which way should we go? Asked Raymond. Hugh grinned. Left is right, right is wrong. That's the rule I always follow. They continued on down the left fork and watched the dense trees give way to the rolling green pastures. The older boy was nervous when this happened. Hugh was used to being ready to duck and run on short notice. The forest felt safe for him should they encounter any trouble. There were many hiding places within the trees. But then he reminded himself that this land did have civilization of some kind, and that meant opportunity. Raymond, you should know something, Hugh said. If there's a town of some sort, we may not be all that welcome. Beggars rarely are. We may have to, no choice but to, liberate things for our survival. You know what I mean? Liberate? Asked Raymond. You mean take? Steal? Hugh shrugged. You were a thief, weren't you? Raymond guessed. Hugh winked. Whatever gave you that idea? How did you get caught? If you're worried about me skills not being the best, you're wrong. Standing before you is, or was, the best picket in all of London. I was only brought down by account of a local mine thought me was me friend. Turned me in for a reward. Bleeding turncoat he was. But you're just a kid like me. Hugh shook his head. I've been that since I was old enough for me parents to sell me into an apprenticeship. Suddenly, Hugh spotted a copse of trees upon a rise. He led Raymond to cover, then peered into the valley below. Not possible, Hugh muttered, his features becoming ashen. Raymond moved forward and gasped. In the distance lay a long farmhouse of some sort, with a windmill at one end and an observation tower at the other. A vast orchard bordered the entire western stretch of the property. Raymond and Hugh watched as a half-dozen people walked about, but it was the creatures standing beside the men and women that made the boys gape in astonishment. Gathered before the farm, seemingly set on some odd communication with the humans, was a troop of creatures that had no place in modern-day reality. They were all sizes and shapes, all colors. Each was adorned with some sort of natural armament, spikes, raised scales, clubbed tails. Some were as large as elephants, others as tall as towering oaks. A pair of man-sized creatures stood on two legs and reminded Raymond of ostriches. Raymond knew the word for this group of creatures. Last summer, his father had taken him to a display of fossils from the creatures like these. Dinosaurs, Raymond whispered. I can't believe it, Hugh said. I can't believe it, that's all. They're so big, Raymond said. Right. Ain't nothing alive that stands that tall. Nothing, I tell you. But they're right in front of us. Stop reminding me. Looks like a delegation of some sort, Raymond said. Or a hunting party, Hugh countered. Don't be absurd. Look at the way they're getting along with people. These creatures aren't out to hunt anyone. Want to bet? I'll be happy so long as we don't end up in dinosaur stew. Raymond stiffened as another thought suddenly struck him. Hugh, do you believe in the hereafter? Why? The dinosaurs died out long ago. If they're here, and people are here, then maybe we died too. Maybe this is heaven. At that moment, a rustling came from the bush behind the boys, causing them both to whirl. Facing them was a creature the likes of which they'd never seen before. Its rough skin was pink and yellow. The ridge above his eyes reminded Raymond of a woman's beret. But its bird-like beak and the tiny spikes protruding from its cheeks hardly looked feminine. Compared to the behemoths in the valley, this creature was small, about the size of a calf, and it had an unmistakable gentle way about it. The dinosaur opened its mouth and started making squawking sounds. They made no sense to Raymond at first. Then he realized the dinosaur was actually speaking to him. Not heaven, though some think it so, she said. I am Bix. Breathe deep and seek peace. Welcome you are. Welcome you both are. Welcome to Dinotopia. Slack-jawed, Hugh stared at the creature for a moment. Finally, he gained enough composure to mutter, It's the fruit. That's what it is. It was poisoned. We're having feverish visions. The dinosaur sighed as though she'd been through this before. For many centuries, we've had visitors from your many lands. I should have listened to you when you said it might be poisoned, Hugh said to Raymond. That's always been my problem. I never listen. You're not listening now, Raymond said. True, Hugh said. There's a reason. Bix laughed. Come with me. I'll introduce you to Nikolai and the others. I don't think so, Hugh said. Raymond touched his friend's arm. Hugh, if we don't go with her, what are we going to do? I don't know, but... Bix angled her head slightly. If I'm not real, what harm can come from following me? Hugh stammered. We might be walking off a cliff or something. Pardon? Bix said. Like a bunch of sleepwalkers, Hugh said. We can't trust our eyes. Yes, Bix said. I can see how that might make life difficult. Raymond was struggling not to become overwhelmed by the odd sights before him. Hugh's attitude was not helping any. I'm going, and if you won't come, I can't make you. Hugh nodded. All right, I'll go. Why not? We'll get eaten instead of getting something to eat. Bix cocked her head again, as if thinking, if you are right, we dinosaurs are not real. You have little to fear. How can you be eaten by something that does not exist? Hugh began, then shook his head, giving up to trying to figure it all out. All right, then, off we go.